A few nights ago on Smackdown, Edge wrestled in his hometown of Toronto, Canada, probably for the last time. It was truly a beautiful, emotional moment fit for a true legend of the game, and luckily your boy was able to attend and be there in person for this moment. But going into this show and even since then, hearing all this talk about Edge being back home, Edge wrestling in Toronto once again, wrestling in this arena again, all I could keep thinking about was a pay-per-view from 2006. A pay-per-view that basically raised me, a show I watched a million times on DVD, a show that I even tried begging my mom to take me to, a show that is in my opinion one of the greatest events of all time. Unforgiven 2006. 06, as we all know, was an amazing time to be a wrestling fan, and when people think of 06, they think of nights like WrestleMania 22, they think of nights like ECW One Night Stand. But Unforgiven was a legendary night that should be right up there with them, a night that for an 8-year-old kid like me was basically like a second WrestleMania. It was September 17, 2006, live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It was Unforgiven. When I think of this show, I cannot help but get the warm and fuzzy feelings all over again. I was actually lucky enough to get this show ordered on pay-per-view back in 06, this time with my mom's permission, and all my friends that lived on my street at the time, they all came over, we ordered some pizza, and we watched the show together, and we knew that this was going to be legendary as soon as the show started, because the first match of the night involved Jeff Hardy. I can't describe in words how happy I was that Jeff Hardy came back to the company in 06. Nah, scratch that. Words can't describe how happy I was finding out that Jeff Hardy was alive in 2006. For some reason, growing up in my neighborhood, there was always this urban legend slash myth that was spread around by the older kids that Jeff Hardy had died. Like, yo, we would ask these older kids like, hey, how come this really cool guy who's on all these VHSs and who's in Shut Your Mouth, how come he doesn't wrestle anymore? They just straight up told us, yeah, he's dead. And in my head, I believed it. I'm like, yeah, of course he did. He probably did a swanton bomb through like 50,000 tables or something. And I found out he was alive when I saw him on TNA. But then when he went missing from TNA, I thought he died again. But beside him resurrecting, seeing him come back to the WWE in 06, it was perfect. It was like a dream come true. We could finally watch him again, watch him live, watch him in the main company we liked watching. We could finally get the full Jeff Hardy experience. And this match here at Unforgiven took place just over a month after his return. And you already know the deal. As soon as he came back, every kid was a Jeff Hardy fan. So seeing him wrestle was always a treat. And at this point, it was so new and fresh and exciting that even though he didn't become IC champion here, we knew it was only a matter of time, but just having Jeff Hardy on this card, it was enough for me. This was Jeff Hardy's first WWE pay-per-view match since February of 2003. It had been 3.5 years, but our boy was back. I no longer had to watch him in TNA, I no longer had to resort to old VHS footage, and I no longer had to pretend to like Matt Hardy. Jeff Hardy was in the cut once again. This night also had Kane vs Umaga, two scary ass mother on the card, along with the weirdest, most 2006 tag team match you could imagine. But what this night is remembered for is how stacked the top half of this card was, because on this night we got a Hell in a Cell match and it wasn't even the main event. Looking back at this show now, looking back at this era, I totally forgot and underestimated how important DX was during this time. These days, the 2006 DX reunion is not looked at too well, and to be honest, it didn't age well, I agree. Looking back at it, it was just a bunch of 40-year-old men running around, acting like they were teenagers, making the dumbest jokes possible. I get that. But yo, let's be honest, back in 06, DX was goated. DX reuniting back then was the best thing that could have ever happened to a generation of young wrestling fans. Now it was our turn to tell our teachers to suck it. Now it was our turn to think we were cool with our DX shirts. Every week DX was doing the stupidest shit on TV, yet for little me it was the funniest and greatest thing ever. We would go to class and like, oh my god, did you see DX? They spray painted on the building, oh my god, DX did this, DX did that. Out of nowhere, just overnight, schools were once again taken over with DX shirts. All my binders had the DX logo all over it. I even remember vividly asking my mom to buy me spray paint because I wanted to do the DX tag outside my house. She obviously didn't buy it for me. It's fine, I get it, my mom just hated me as a child, it's whatever. As cringy as it may have seemed to older fans in 06, it was still a wave to be honest, and seeing Shawn Michaels and Triple H be boys on TV, just wildin' out for old time's sake, it was awesome. And on this night, this was a night where DX put on a show. This was the night where after they reunited, where it was like, okay, this is what we need from them. It was DX versus the McMahons and the Big Show in a Hell in a Cell match, and this match was everything an 8-year-old fan like me needed back then. This was back when the Hell in a Cell matches still had that aura. This was when they were special. This was when a Hell in a Cell match was announced. It was hype because you thought someone was gonna die. And after a night that started with the Hardys losing and a few whatever matches, this was where everything hit the fan. DX versus the McMahons was a bloodbath. It was a massacre. It was 25 minutes of pure carnage. It was honestly shocking, and for us dumbass little 8-year-old bloodthirsty wrestling fans, this was exactly what we needed. Triple H and Shawn Michaels going full savage mode. After months of joking around and whatnot, they were back on Demon Time, and it was amazing because it was these three idiots getting clapped, who everyone hated. Vince at this point was just genuinely insane. Big Show was so fat, it made no sense, and Shane, yo, he was a loser too by this point. From weapons to using the cell to all the blood you could imagine, this felt like a video game match in real life, and this one was definitely rated M for mature, and it just fit the era. This is what kids wanted from wrestling back then. We wanted to see people die, and that's what we got. We didn't care about storylines or work rate or anything like that. We wanted death, we wanted mayhem, murder, and madness. Shout out to Gucci Mane, and that's exactly what we got. I will never forget the sledgehammer shots that left you thinking Vince had reached the afterlife. I'll never forget the coast to coast, and I will definitely never ever forget Vince McMahon getting shoved up Big Show's fat. Wait, what? If you watch this match now, you will probably cringe at how insane this was, but yo, this was what we wanted and this is what we needed, and man, on this night at Unforgiven 06, we got it, and we will never ever get anything like this ever again. And you know what? Maybe that's a good thing. You take in how impactful DX was back then, plus the violence, plus the fact it was a Hell in a Cell match, this went 5 stars in the hood. I don't care what anyone says, I don't care what some nerd with a blog says, this was a match that the real ones loved, and this was a match that they watched over and over again. And that's what made this night so special. On one night did we not only get this insane Hell in a Cell match, it was the 3rd biggest match of the night. This show was also the night where hometown hero Trish Stratus ended her first run as a wrestler. One of the most important women's wrestlers of all time went out with a bang in an awesome match in front of 18,000 screaming fans against Lita. Before there ever was a women's revolution, when I thought of iconic pay-per-view women's matches, this was the only one that I could really think of. Trish Stratus winning the women's championship, going out as champion, getting an awesome celebration with even the commentators standing up and applauding her, Lillian Garcia announcing her as the winner and crying. And I'll be honest, I was a kid who did not care whatsoever about women's wrestling at the time, but even I knew back then how epic this was, and it hit harder because she was from the same city that I was from, and she was retiring here, and she was going out as the champion. It was such a special moment for women's wrestling. Back when women's wrestling never really got the spotlight, it definitely got the spotlight here. And it's funny because when I think of this match and I think of this show, I actually have a funny little story involving Trish Stratus from back in the day. So leading up to this show, Trish Stratus actually had an interview on a news channel here in Toronto, and they were just hyping up the event, you know, trying to move some last minute tickets. And I remember they were doing call-in questions, and yo, you bet your ass that little 8-year-old me called into TV to ask her a question. I remember grabbing the home phone from my house and secretly dialing the number, and I was on hold for a solid 45 minutes waiting and hoping that I could talk to Trish Stratus, but sadly they never put me through and the interview ended. And it was funny because I didn't really have a question to ask her. I have no idea what I would have asked her if I got through. I just wanted to be able to say that I talked to a wrestler on TV. But sadly, it never happened. But yeah, man, Trish Stratus going out as champion in front of her hometown in the Air Canada Centre, it was a big moment. We had a Hell in a Cell match, we had a retirement match of a legend. This night also had Randy Orton hitting a banger RKO out of nowhere, Jeff Hardy's first pay-per-view match in years in the WWE. That itself is iconic. That makes a classic show on many other nights. But all of that on this night doesn't even hold a candle to the main event. John Cena versus Edge in a TLC match for the title. Edge, who had been wrestling in the company since 1999, fast forward 7 years, walked into Toronto, walked into the Air Canada Centre at the time as WWE champion, with his mom in the front row, his family and friends in the arena. The same kid who went to WrestleMania in Toronto came back to the city as the champion and main evented against John Cena. Yo, you guys already know, when it comes to matches from my childhood, our childhood, it doesn't get more iconic than this. My go GOAT versus his arch nemesis in both of their primes with a crowd that is so hot, all behind Edge. After months of this amazing build that had everything you could ever ask for, it really was Superman versus Lex Luthor. It was Batman versus the Joker. And these two tore the house down. Tables, ladders, and chairs, oh my. Cena versus Edge alone was big enough, but a TLC match, back when they were rare, back when we rarely got them, this was the first TLC match on a pay-per-view since 2001, and I was so excited for this. For a TLC match, to see all the destruction, the mayhem, and I'm gonna be honest, I remember I was scared. I really thought my boy John Cena could lose this one, because you gotta remember, going into this, Cena had never been in a TLC match, and Edge at this point had never lost one. When I look back at all the wrestling I've watched in my life, this match has to be in my top 5 most watched wrestling matches ever. My favorite versus my most hated, taking the craziest bumps that honestly you never thought Cena would ever take, or even Edge after his neck surgery, with the hottest crowd you could imagine. Throughout the whole match, I really thought Cena was gonna lose because that slimy piece of shit Edge, he always found a way to win. This really was iconic to say the least. It had so much drama, so much hype. Cena had all the disadvantages, the match type, the location, the fact that if he lost, the storyline was that he would have to go to Smackdown if he lost, and after months of all the slimy, disgusting stuff Edge did, it literally seemed impossible. These days we get a lot of hometown big matches like Drew McIntyre at Clash at the Castle or Sami Zayn in Elimination Chamber at Montreal, but this was like sort of the first one from back in the day I could remember like that. It was unlike anything I had seen at that point as a wrestling fan. And after 25 minutes of chaos, Cena had to resort to doing the unthinkable. When you have a story like this and a feud like this and a match like this that is so hot with everything going for it, from location to match type to everything I mentioned before, you have to have a legendary ending. And honestly, it's hard to find a better ending for any wrestling match ever than Cena finally beating Edge by doing his finisher off the top of a ladder through 2 tables stacked on top of each other, ending the legendary 06 feud that made both of them legends. To this day, one of the most insane things I've ever seen, and it definitely puts into perspective why Edge had to retire like 5 years after this. You just had to have been there, man. Cena finally had that career-defining win. He finally dispatched the supervillain and did it in a way where he came off as such a monster, as such a badass. He came off so legit. And on the flip side, even though Edge lost the match, Edge had finally become a true certified main eventer. After being a tag team wrestler, after neck injuries, after only getting a month reign earlier this year, just 9 months later, he sold out his hometown as the WWE champion. He wrestled a classic in front of his mom and his family and his friends, and he showed the world that he belonged, that he could carry the company, he could carry a feud, that him and John Cena have that elite chemistry. And from here on out, Edge was cemented. It's crazy because it's not only a match and a moment that means a lot to me as a kid who watched it a bunch of times, or for you that probably watched it a bunch of times. It's a match that to this day that these two who are involved in, even they still get emotional about it all these years later. What a night and what a special show, not just for us, but like I said, even the guys in the main event. It's a show that was supposed to be honestly just another monthly Raw pay-per-view, but it's a show that ended up being one that all these years later, I still think about, I still get nostalgic, and I do consider one of the greatest shows ever. When I'm at the Air Canada Centre these days, which is now called the Scotiabank Arena as an adult, I'm like, damn, this is where it happened. This is where Cena and Edge had that match. This is where Unforgiven 06 took place. And I just can't help but smile. It's a show that wasn't WrestleMania or SummerSlam or a Rumble, and this was a time back when getting a pay-per-view was rare. You know, spending $40 on a show was a lot of money. This was back when if you bought a DVD of a wrestling show, you were gonna watch it 100 times to get your money worth, and you would hope and you would pray that the pay-per-view would be good, or the DVD would be good. You would dream of getting a show like this, and we did. And that's why I watched it 100 times back in the day. Yo, like I didn't have a babysitter. I had my grandma sleeping on the couch and I had Unforgiven on the TV. And with Edge letting us know that his match against Sheamus the other night was his last time wrestling in Toronto, I couldn't help but think back to this. And it's funny how everything came full circle. What a time it was to be alive.